Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the IBM TV network. And today we're going to be looking at taxes, inflation, and the economy. And so, with that, I have two special guests who are actually CPAs, and we're going to bring them on right now because they know a little bit about taxes. First, we're going to bring in the tax partner at Holt House, Carlin and Van Trike from Park City, Utah. Let's welcome to the show Blake Christian. Blake, welcome to the show.
Morning, Nick.
Yep, we got some very exciting topics today: taxes, inflation, and the economy. And we're going to be joined later on by the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States. In about a half an hour, just as you leave, he shows up. By the way, Blake, which I think.
I know. Sorry.
But yeah, well, no, you have a substitute. The former Comptroller General of the United States subs in for you. With that, also, we have another CPA hailing out of South Dakota. Maybe it's North Dakota, sorry. Anyway, he's a certified tax coach. Let's bring in John Power. John, welcome to the show. I know you've been taxes.
And it is North Dakota, Nick.
North Dakota, that's what I'm saying. I was thinking South Dakota, but it is absolutely North Dakota. But we're going to actually be talking about a very important topic under the Biden administration. And frankly, it's an important topic for everybody. And this deals with taxes. In other words, our friend Uncle Joe, I call him, wants to spend about 1.8 trillion in more money, and I'm not sure how he's going to pay for it. But usually, the best way they pay for it is taxes. Okay, in other words, they're going to tax somebody somehow, and there's all these proposals out there to tax people. What are we looking at in 2022, Blake, when it comes to taxes? In other words, people are looking at this and all of a sudden, gosh, our business is doing well, and now they want to take it away from us. What are you telling your client to do in 2022?
Well, over the last few weeks, we're telling them a lot different than we were telling them earlier in the year. So, as you may know, with the Build Back Better plan, which hasn't passed the Senate yet, they at least backed off of most of the really negative tax consequences. So they got rid of the estate tax overhaul, where they're going to lower the unified lifetime credit. They aren't going to raise the capital gain rate, which was a huge concern of our clients. Those could have doubled for many with long-term capital gains. You could have had ordinary rates apply to those rather than the beneficial 23.8. And what they've replaced that with is a kind of a billionaires or a multimillionaire tax. They've got an excise tax if you make more than I think it's $10 million. They've been changing it along the way, but anyway, there's a surtax that would apply if your income is over a certain threshold, and that's going to apply to a very, very small group of people. Who knows what they'll do in 2022, but at least they backed off on the really negative consequences for the wealthy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, you just talked briefly about capital gains, and I know you're involved in Oz. And the thing is, a lot of our viewers may not know very much about Oz. Can you explain people a little bit, just briefly, what is the wonderful world of Oz? How does that work?
Right. So Opportunity Zone program came in under the Trump administration, although it was the architects of the program came in under the Obama administration. So it's a very bipartisan bill. And the idea is when you have a large capital gain, you can either invest it in what we call a public fund, Opportunity Zone fund, or you can set up your own. You do have to make a 10-year commitment on that money in order to get all the tax benefits. But it basically comes in three phases. One is a immediate deferral of that gain until December 31st, 2026. And then you'll report the gain and pay the tax in 2027. The second piece is if you hold that Oz investment for 5 years, you'll get a 10% basis bump. So if you deferred $1 million of gain, you'll only pay tax on $900,000 of gain in when you write the check in 2027. I always caution people, we don't know what the capital gain rate, that's the gamble. We don't know what the capital gain rate in 2020 at the end of 2026 is going to be. Now, the final benefit and the reason you really want to do this is, again, if you, in my example, if you invested $1 million and that appreciated to $10 million, that $9 million of appreciation for federal purposes goes poof. You never pay tax on that.
Mm-hmm.
And on a real estate deal, all the depreciation you claimed during that 10-year hold also goes poof.
Really?
So that ends up,
you don't have depreciation recapture then.
Yeah, that ends up creating about on our calculations, 25 to 30% additional return over that 10-year period. So 3% per year roughly. It's pretty impactful.
Right.
And you can do this for real estate deals as well as for operating businesses. And as you know, Nick, I have my own Opportunity Zone fund, and we convert shipping containers into housing. So investors get the benefit of both an industrial building as well as the operating business.
Right.
Period.
Yeah. And the reason I'm asking is that I have clients that are selling businesses all the time. One selling a pharmaceutical company, having like an $8 million gain. Another one, it's like a boat building business, $20 million capital gain. And the problem with pensions is there's not much I can do about it. In other words, I break down at capital gains level. It just doesn't work. So would an opportunity zone work for them? In other words, where they're selling their business, and could they reinvest the gains in an opportunity zone? Would that work for them?
Absolutely, and I'm using all the knowledge you've given me over the last 3 decades, and so when they have these massive gains, I first get them a supercharged pension plan with your team's expertise, and then what's left.
I was going to push them to you and say, do an opportunity.
Yeah. Well, the great thing about the pension is that's going to save dollars at the maximum rate.
Sure, right.
And then we come in with the Oz and defer their capital gains. So it's a great blended strategy.
Yeah, it's not mutually exclusive,
Right.
The thing is, I run into these, they call it a 415 limit. In other words, there's only so much I can put in a pension. And then when they're talking about gains of 8 million and 20 million, I'm going, I can't stuff that much money in a pension. I just don't have the room for that. So an opportunity zone would work for those people then, so when they're doing their business sales then.
Right. Yeah. We have clients, on the weekend, I was talking to somebody who has $200 million of, capital gains in 2021. And
right.
He's going to put 50 million. So we have a lot. The largest one I have for an individual is 150 million. But we have a lot between 20 and 50 million.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So it's like an exit strategy. John, speaking about exit strategy, John, in North Dakota, do you guys get involved in opportunity zones up there? Or are there any zones that there's any opportunity up in North Dakota?
Oh yeah. I haven't done any. Listening to Blake, it's I find it interesting. The topic has come up frequently. I shouldn't say, at least not infrequently. Just I've never had one where that strategy fit for the client, because first of all, it is a short-term deferral now. When it first came out, obviously it was longer. The ability to exclude gains if you hold it long enough, is still the deferral isn't as attractive, but the exclusion is still just as attractive.
Right. Okay. Sasha, since you joined us from Canada, do they have such strategies over in Canada, like opportunity zones for capital gains taxes or anything like that, so that people can mitigate their taxes when they go to sell their businesses? Do you see anything like that?
To tell the truth, it's not my area of expertise. All I heard is that there are special zones for high-tech developments, one near Vancouver and one in Quebec near Montreal. And I think there is one near Ottawa, but it's more or less in Ontario. So there are some preferential treatments for the high-tech investments or so, but that's not exactly the same with what you're discussing, I guess.
Right. Yeah. Okay. All right. So, Blake, I'll go back to you when it comes to like tax planning when you're meeting with a client now. That what is your vision for 2022? Some of our clients are concerned that tax rates are actually going to go up in 2022. And some of them are concerned that if they get deferrals now, they're going to be pushed into higher tax brackets later on. Are we looking at a situation because of our huge deficit where more taxes are going to be on to the higher income taxpayers? In other words, that's their target.
Yeah, we're cautioning clients that I think we dodged a bullet with what I just talked about. That they took away a lot of the tax increases, corporate tax rate increases, etc. I think they'll come back in 22, but we got to remember too, 2022 is an election year, so it may not be real smart for Congress to be jacking up tax rates in an election year. But if I was going to bet, I think rates are going to be higher, in the next 4 to 6 years rather than lower. There's little doubt in my mind because of the deficit spending and the public sentiment now. I mean, anybody under 40, I would say, is very much kind of tax the rich, and they can pay more, and that mentality. So I think tax rates, there's not pressure to lower them. Let's put it that way.
Right.
Other than the conservatives.
Right. Yeah. John, what are you saying? Are you looking at your crystal ball? Our taxes are going to right up. You get
The crystal ball is pretty cloudy.
Yeah. Well,
we need like Blake says, I don't expect to see anything probably in 2022. I mean, the Democrats are having enough problems as it is, and their prospects for the midterm elections aren't looking very good as of now. What I see, and what's still, Blake's right. A lot of the things we were most concerned about were removed out of the bill before it passed the House. But there were still a number of things in there that have some pretty significant tax ramifications, like taking away Section 1202, which is the ability to defer gains if you sell stock in an S or a C corporation that was formed after 1993. That caps out at a relatively small amount, and that's been an issue that I've seen with some clients when we've looked at things like selling businesses. Also, when they start putting things like the net investment tax onto S corporation earnings, very quickly, we've looked at some scenarios where, especially in a little higher tax state, like Minnesota or California, someplace like that, you can pretty easily have some effective tax rates over 50%. So even though they're not raising the tax rates per se, there's still enough things in that bill that could for some people, and not necessarily just people making $10 million, people making over $400,000 can be impacted pretty significantly. So that's the kinds of things that I'm concerned about, because that will affect a lot more people.
Okay. I'm going to shift gears a little bit about affecting a lot more people. What are we looking about this one that seems to be rearing its ugly head? And it did so years ago. It's called inflation. It's like sitting.
I was thinking this weekend, I want to go to an antique store and find a win button from, what was it, 1974,
right?
And then add to it, vote no BBB on it. But
yeah, well, the thing, see, the real problem, a lot of people don't remember Gerald Ford's whip inflation. Now they don't remember the times when inflation was in double digits. It was like 10%. I remember I got my first house loan at around 10%. I was thrilled because it was that low. Okay, in other words, I got a 10% interest loan. I thought, gosh, what a great credit rating I have. I got 10%. And inflation was out of control. Are we looking at this, a possibility, Blake? And I'll start with you. Inflation, which was around 6, close to 7% this year, continuing into the future. In other words, where we're just seeing rampant inflation. And back then, they couldn't stop it. It's almost like, hey, look, we can't stop it. What are your thoughts about inflation, Blake?
Yeah, I mean, we've been spoiled for the last 2.5 decades, I think, with low interest rates. And I was in the same boat. I think it was 80. I bought my first townhouse. Thankfully, it was only about $78,000 and started off at about 10.5%.
Right.
It capped out at 18.5. Now, luckily, I was at the beginning of my career and my income was going up very quickly. But, it
So
was.
you had an arm then.
Yeah, exactly. I
Right.
mean, and you talk to anybody under 55 and you'll
They don't
win
know
a
what an
lot of
arm is.
bets. You'll win a lot of bets that mortgage rates were that high.
Right.
But they were. And I think we're going to be in a super inflationary environment for at least the next 24 months. And, I think on that, I think.
Well, I saw it in the home prices around here. The home, I mean, it's almost you can't touch anything under 400,000. It's impossible, and that's really strange because that wasn't the way it was even a year and a half ago. We'll shift up to Canada, Sasha, because inflation hit the United States pretty hard. Home prices are hit pretty hard. What about in Canada? Are you looking at inflation there? Usually, what happens here, we sneeze and it rolls over to Canada. In other words, they don't seem to be able to avoid anything we do here. What's your thoughts on that, Sasha?
Yeah, inflation is a big concern in Canada as well. In Toronto, where I live, real estate prices are skyrocketing, and there is no slowdown. Although many people predicted there will be some kind of a breath and some kind of a slowdown, at least a bit, and there is no such thing. It's the prices are going higher and higher. The food, most of the foods in Canada is imported from US and from Latin America and so on. The food prices are going because of the transportation factor is going tremendously higher. It is concerned. I wouldn't be surprised if the rate will be raised in Canada probably around March, April next year. But so is US probably will do the same thing, most likely. And that's unfortunately the world we live in.
Yeah. John, what are your thoughts about inflation and housing prices? I didn't look at the housing in North Dakota, so maybe you can still get decent housing there. I don't know. But what about inflation and housing there? What's happening in North Dakota?
Maybe decent compared to other parts of the country, but yeah, we're seeing the same thing with housing prices going up rapidly. Housing actually has gotten to be where there's bidding wars on housing. A lot of it's driven obviously by the low interest rates we've had. I agree. I think the inflation is a significant concern. I just read something this weekend. Used car prices are up almost a third this year. That's almost, we can't even fathom that. That's like Venezuela, someplace like that. I think the concern is that first there's always a reason for it. First it was supply chain issues, and then it was something else, and if the government, the president and his advisors aren't willing to look at the really what's causing some of these more systemic reasons for the inflation, you could very easily repeat the late 70s, I think.
Sure. Well, and you also mentioned another country that we don't beam into, which is Venezuela. And I was, because we just got accepted our programming on Al Jazeera. So we are beaming in through Al Jazeera. Don't ask me why, and the BBC. So I've got 2 more places. I'm going like, are you kidding me? They keep accepting our programming. Well, that's good. Except it goes into Qatar. They're headquartered in Qatar. It goes to Saudi Arabia and all those places. But I was checking just yesterday about getting flights to Caracas, Venezuela. There are no flights to Caracas, Venezuela. The U.S. has banned flights to Caracas, Venezuela, because Venezuela, which is one time an oil-rich, prosperous country, is now basically a failed state governed by corruption, gangs, murders, and they said it's just frankly not safe. Okay, then what says that the United States is not heading down the primrose path of socialism, Venezuela, Cuban style? by the way, and their model was Cuba, which was just weird. So I'll start with you, Blake, on this one. Is it possible that the United States becomes the next Venezuela? In other words, the collapse took place very, very quickly. And all of a sudden, the whole thing just imploded as people said, "Oh, let's tax the rich, let's destroy all the corporations that are out there. They're all bad and evil." And then all of a sudden, poof, you become another Venezuela. Is that possible to happen in the United States? I'm
Oh,
getting my ticket ready to go to Canada, so that's the reason I'm asking.
I think it's not just probable. I think it's highly possible, and I think we're already, halfway there, and the path was paved with COVID. I was having a few discussions over the weekend, with other business owners, just about the problem of getting employees, and I truly think that a lot of it. I mean, we've seen, a ton of people just quitting their careers because of COVID, and then you have these government programs, the handouts, etc. And I think people became kind of minimalists during COVID and said, "Hey, I'm living at home." People moved back in with their parents, more shared housing and things, and all of a sudden people go, "Hey, I don't have to work so hard."
Yeah.
And I think the current government is kind of feeding those flames of everybody slowing down and relying on the government, and it's kind of the first step to socialism, and then could get worse, and it's a natural step to communism.
Yeah, well, it becomes socialism Cuban style or socialism Venezuela style, which, by the way, doesn't really fit my style of how I like to live, by the way.
Right.
Where there's no food on the shelves and there's gangs running amok, and it looks pretty horrible. And I know Sasha had to sort of deal with this when he was in the Soviet Union, and then he moved to Canada. Now the question is this: in Canada, because by the way, Canada is my number one. Hey, that's where I'm going to move to. To get out of the United States. What are your thoughts about this? Is it possible the United States turns into another Cuba, Venezuela? I mean, you can't discount this to be a zero probability. There's a possibility, and that imploded very quickly. The wealthiest Latin American country imploding. Is that possible here in the United States, Sasha?
From my younger days, when I was a student at the university, it doesn't matter what you study, medicine or music or chemistry, it doesn't matter. The most important subjects were Marxism and Leninism. There are two subjects were far the most important. And if you succeeded in the studies, all the rest is almost irrelevant. I happen to be a good student overall, and I love history, and I read a lot of these texts. And one of the doctrines of the socialism is those who don't work, don't eat. So in this case, with all the subsidies, United States went much farther than even Soviet Union to creating the socialist society, because you're right, indeed, a lot of people, they just don't need to work because of the subsidies, because of the shared accommodation in many cases, and so on. Is it good for a country? I don't think so, because the most prosperous invention, the people, it all attracted by curiosity, by need to explore new horizons, to invent something. And this doctrine of handouts, basically it kills the 99% of all the inventions and all this people, talents and so on. So this is ridiculous, and I never thought that in a country like the United States, which just, I remember 30 years ago, it was a dream country. It was example for all the world. This is what you should strive, either to move to the United States or to do something in your country which would make it closer, bring it closer to the United States. It's no longer there. What's happening today?
Yeah. And it looks like this Build Back Better is just a handout for this, a handout for that, a handout for this and that. It's not like we're building infrastructure. We're just handing out to whatever your agendas are, like the Family Leave Act, where everybody should get a month off for having a kid. Well, give them 2 months, give them a whole year.
Yeah.
I mean, I just go through every one of them. I'm going like, it's just handing out money everywhere. There's nothing in return, and I don't know. I see it heading down the road to where becoming Venezuela. What are your thoughts, John? Are we heading to become the next Venezuela, Cuba?
I think it's certainly a possibility. I don't think it's a probability. I think one of the strengths of our country historically is we always seem to return to the middle. We're moved by extremes on either side for relatively short periods of time, but there is Nixon's silent majority sitting in the middle that is still the biggest. It tends to be the biggest block. I think certainly we've overall moved that possibility is a greater one than it was, say, 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the biggest concerns is with the discussions that have been going on for the last few years. There's not a sense among, especially we all have a little bit of gray hair, so we always pick on younger people, but younger people don't have the same sense of America being that shining city on the hill that, like Sasha referred to, that was the dream where people go to. Now it's more of a focus, especially on the progressive side of politics, of what's wrong with America. And certainly we're not perfect, but there's an awful lot right with America. And I think that would be, if that continues, that would increase that possibility.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Now we're going to bring in our friend from the Washington, D.C. area, the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States. So we can put him on the spot here. Hey, Dave, welcome. Sorry. Yeah, Blake leaves every time you come in. Okay, so you're a substitute.
Well, I hope it's nothing personal.
in case you didn't know. So the thing is, he comes in for the first half hour, and then you come in. I say, well, you got a pretty good substitute. But we've been talking about this particular problem, and this deals with our friends down south and deals with the economy in general. Is the United States heading toward becoming the next Venezuela? In other words, are we looking at the beginning of the next Venezuela? I was trying to book flights to go to Caracas, and then I found I can't book flights to Caracas. Caracas has been banned. I can't go to Venezuela because it's a failed state. Now, at one time, it was the light of South America. It was rich, oil rich. And then all of a sudden they introduced a huge giveaway program, and the whole state has collapsed into, well, you can't even go to it anymore. So
we had a vacation in 1985 in Margarita Island with my family, and it's a fantastic place. It's almost like a dream holiday at that time.
Oh, you went to Venezuela then?
In 85, yeah.
In 85,
Island.
Right.
It was a dream place, but unfortunately, no longer.
Well, my flights were canceled. In other words, I was going, okay, I'm not going to go there. That was on my list, but then I guess I'm not going to Caracas this year because the whole country's a failed state. The real question is the United States becoming Cuba 2 or Venezuela 1, David? Are we looking at that?
Well,
especially when your Uncle Joe wants to give away $1.8 billion.
Well, two things. Number one, my son actually got engaged on Margarita Island in 1999, and in fact, I was on Margarita Island the weekend that I found out that I was being nominated to be Comptroller General. It was 98. I was nominated to be Comptroller General of the United States, and my son got engaged to his now wife. So it is a special place, and that was a different time. I don't think the United States is going to become a Venezuela, but I would note that Venezuela, has by becoming a socialist state, and totally mismanaged, that things have really gone south terribly, and that you have a lot of people that are trying to migrate from Venezuela to the United States. And what's interesting is you've probably seen some recent polling where Hispanics are now tied between whether they prefer Republicans or whether they prefer Democrats. And when you look at immigrants from Cuba and Venezuela, they are overwhelmingly Republican because they know what can happen if government gets too big, if it tries to socialize everything, if it tries to control too much, and that's the direction that we're headed. But I don't think we'll ever be a Venezuela or a Cuba.
Dave, and at the same time, Venezuela will never become United States. Okay.
That's correct. That's correct. But let's put it this way: we're not headed in the right direction. All right. And we've talked about this before. What we have going on right now, in my view, is an ideological battle between whether or not we're going to stick with the principles and values on which this country was founded and frankly helped to make us great, or are we going to adopt the socialist states principles advocated by Saul Alinsky and others? And right now, the energy in the Democratic Party is behind those principles. And the Build Back Better bill, to a great extent, is very consistent with those principles. And the modern monetary theory is totally consistent with those principles. And it's important that we not go that direction.
Yeah, and the same thing is, I'm a Democrat, and I agree with you. As a matter of fact, the real problem I'm having with the Democratic Party, I go in their face. I don't buy all the garbage that they're feeding people, and I can't believe that other people would buy it, especially this Build Back Better program, which is just another name for we're going to send a bunch of money out to people. I mean, I think it's totally appalling. In other words, it's moving toward a Venezuela, Cuba style type economy. It's the wrong way to go.
Well, the American people, we already have a record percentage of the population that receives government benefits, a record percentage. This would serve to increase the size of government,
correct?
Increase the number of people dependent on government programs.
Right.
It would serve to increase mandatory spending. It makes new promises when we don't know how we're going to pay for the $102 trillion in unfunded obligations we already have.
Correct.
Okay? It would stoke inflation. All right. I mean, I can keep on going, but I think that's enough. And I think Manchin is right. And hopefully Manchin and possibly Sinema will hold the line so it won't pass.
Yeah, because I think if it's passed, it's absolutely horrible. In other words, I went through it. I'm going, you've got to be kidding. Because the difference between that and the infrastructure bill, you're actually building things. You're building assets. Let's put it this way. David, this doesn't build any assets. Show me what asset we're building out of this. The social assets aren't things that you can actually sell. I mean, there's some good stuff, don't get me wrong, but that's not how you go about getting it. And so I had a real problem with that. Then I started saying, well, let's figure out where else I could go live. And I looked at Sasha's place. I like Canada. Then I went south to Venezuela, and I found I couldn't even get in. Why can't I get in? It's because the state failed. I was going, when did this happen? I guess I wasn't watching.
But the bill also has things in it that should be no part of the budget reconciliation process. It has massive immigration reform in it. Okay, that has no business whatsoever being in a budget reconciliation bill. And the reason they're trying to stuff it in there is because there's no way in the world they'd get 60 votes to be able to pass it in the Senate. Otherwise, they're trying to get just a simple majority vote, and hopefully the parliamentarian will hold the line on that and continue to say no, it doesn't belong in there. And last thing, some of these things are appropriate, but they're not properly targeted. I mean, they give things to too many people. They don't condition it on work. It's whatever.
Yeah, I don't know why they think work is a bad thing. I just don't get that. In other words, for some reason, that's not tied to, okay, you're going to get this benefit, but in return, you need to put in X amount of hours into doing a startup, or X amount of hours planting a garden, or do something that would actually build an asset. I don't even care what it is, but it's not tied to that at all. In other words, it's all like, okay, this is for you for, showing up. I don't get it.
I would come with the idea that the people who are giving all those handouts, they should probably devote at least 5 hours a day analyzing chess openings. So there could be some use of their brains.
Right. Well, the thing is, let's say they spent 5 hours a day learning how to code or learning how to work computers or do something. In other words, to me, it seems like it's a government one-way street. we're going to hand out money for these programs, but we're not going to ask anything for return, which leads me to believe there's going to be an increase in this thing called taxes. And people do complain about the tax system not being fair. We discussed it earlier before you got here, David. What are your thoughts about reforming the tax system? Because it's in your book.
Good luck.
Well, my thoughts are we desperately need to do it. Okay. My personal view is that it is way overly complex. We need to streamline and simplify it. We spend about $1.4 trillion a year in deductions, exemptions, credits, and exclusions.
Right.
A number of those items are some of the biggest areas of fraud, waste, and abuse, including the earned income tax credit. I mean, from an intellectual standpoint, probably the best way to go from an economic standpoint is probably a progressive consumption tax, but we'll probably never get there. I can argue that they went lower than they needed to go on the reduction in the rate for corporate. We probably didn't need to go all the way down to 21. But I also believe that we need to think about having some type of a global minimum tax for corporations if it can be enforced. And that's the real question. Can it effectively be enforced?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now I'm going to put you on the other spot. What do you think about the billionaire tax? Apparently there's a very popular opinion that billionaires have too much money, too much power. So we want to segregate them out as a class and tax them. What are your thoughts about?
Well, first, billionaires don't make their money on wages. All right. And so therefore they don't pay Social Security and Medicare taxes on a vast majority of their income. All right. Secondly, the way that they make most of their money, they get more favorable capital gains treatment. So their effective tax rate is a lot lower than middle class America. Thirdly, they can take advantage of a lot more deductions and other types of tax preferences than most Americans can. And so I think, when you look at the growing gap between the have and have-nots in America, and it's real, okay, it is real. A lot of people talk about, since we're not going to get it through the income tax from a practical standpoint, maybe we ought to have a wealth tax and, a very small percentage of the accumulated wealth. Well, you can make an intellectual argument that might be more equitable. The real question is, can it work? Is it enforceable? Right. And I know that there are other countries that evidently have tried that and have not been successful. But I think from the standpoint of the population as a whole, there would be a lot more support for that than some of the other proposals that are being talked about. Okay.
And then that brings me to another issue that is an issue that we discuss on our Investing with Sasha show. It deals with this. I don't know if it has hit Washington, D.C. It's called Bitcoin. Okay. Bitcoin has become just extremely popular. Cryptocurrencies in general, very popular. But it seems to me that it doesn't seem like there's a lot of tax evasion going on with cryptocurrencies, especially Bitcoin. Is there anything to stop Bitcoin from taking over as a dominant currency? There's talk about it, but I don't know. What are your thoughts, David?
Well, first, I consider Bitcoin a non-traditional investment, and it's hard for me to see how it would end up replacing the dollar and some other reserve currencies as the primary means of exchange for goods and services. Secondly, I'm still not comfortable with how it works. Thirdly, it is the source of a lot of tax evasion, and it is also the source of a lot of illegal activity.
Right.
So for all of those reasons, I'm not a fan of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. And to date, I have not invested in them. Although I know you have one, and it's probably
I do have one. It's
$1,000 today. Okay?
Yeah, right.
Just don't lose it.
Yeah, well, it's sitting back over there, but it is what it is.
If
a
it's
Bitcoin.
worth $50-something thousand, you might want to put it in a safety deposit box.
Well, the problem is my basis is next to nothing, and so I have a big taxable gain. The other problem is there's no reporting. So where do you even report the capital
Well,
gains?
see, that's my whole
go-
point. It's a major source of tax
evasion, and so
I mean,
so
when people talk about the tax gap,
yeah,
the only way that you're really going to effectively address the tax gap is you have to have a lot more reporting of the basis of investments,
yeah,
including but not limited to Bitcoin. And in addition, you have to have a lot more withholding
yeah,
for individuals who make their money
yeah.
not through wages, but through self-employment income or other forms.
Yeah, well, I mean, to me, it's a nice little pretty coin, and I got a lot of currency sitting back there, and I just go, okay, it's a coin.
I come back to what I said. You ought to put it in a safety deposit.
Safe deposit box. Yeah, you're right.
That has nothing. There's no effect on your taxes. You don't want somebody to take it.
It's what they call unrealized capital gains.
Exactly.
And the other problem I have with it, there's not a lot of places where I can't go to my bank and say, hey, here's my Bitcoin, give me 50 grand. Because
where do you get it?
I don't know. See, that's the whole point. That's part of the reason I keep it. I'm going, okay, where do I change it into? So I just keep it. Sasha, what are your thoughts on this crazy little thing called Bitcoin? I have one. I'm not really sure about it, and I'll stick it back in my. Yeah, right. I probably have to have a safe deposit box because I got all sorts of crazy.
Well, I would say when you're talking about some kind of entity or investment class, you have to compare it to something else. You cannot just say it's good or it's not so good or it's bad. You have to compare it to something. So Bitcoin, let's try to compare it to gold. Gold is historically a store of value. Is Bitcoin or any other crypto a store of value? It's a big question because it's essentially it's a generated computer code, and supposedly on Bitcoin there's a ceiling of 21 million Bitcoins being mined, and it will take still several years, dozens of years to create all those 21 million. But then, okay, so you've created computer code, and what is the value of computer code? So you spend some energy to create these codes, and that's the reason China is banning all these crypto producers because they're consuming too much electricity to create their codes. So, okay, so you have billions or trillions of computer codes, and you're trying to prove that this is a store of value. I disagree with that because if computing power will be substantially increased in the next few years, as it usually goes, like every 3 years, it's doubled its speed, and the new chips are being developed and so on. So I have serious doubts whether it will store its value, and some people believe that it's a store value of nothing really, because if you are taking really the value of all these computer codes which were needed to create all the scripts and bitcoins including and so on. So I have many doubts. I'm not investing in cryptos and bitcoins, and I think that there is for several reasons there is a rocky time before them. As early as next year, I believe.
John, what are your thoughts in North Dakota Bitcoin?
I kind of agree with Sasha. It all comes back to anything like this it's a medium of exchange, and what's the value of that medium of exchange, and it's still pretty speculative on things like that, and I hadn't thought about Sasha's point about the increase in computing power, but that's been going on, is going to continue going on. So as that continues to accelerate, as we expect it will, that would make sense that it lowers the value of that what's been mined. So I hadn't thought about that. Good point, Sasha.
Okay,
and I have to drop off, but it's been fun.
Okay, all right, we'll see you, John. The last thing that we had that came in from our wire deals with this company called Tesla. They were saying that Tesla is the next or the biggest, fastest growing corporation in the world and will continue to grow. I don't know, David, if you've looked at Tesla at all. Is Tesla the company that's going to take us out of all the problems of America? In other words, solve it because it's growing so fast and basically taking over everything. What are your thoughts about Tesla?
Well, I'm not directly invested in Tesla, although part of my money is invested by Fisher Investments, and it may be part of their portfolio. I haven't looked to see. Tesla receives huge tax incentives from the federal government,
Right.
and in fact, those tax incentives are proposed to be expanded significantly under the "quote unquote" green legislation. As I recall off the top of my head, that anybody who ends up driving an electric vehicle will get a tax credit of $12,000. That is a heavy subsidy. Okay. So, at the same point in time, last time I checked, I think only about 2% of the vehicles on the road now are electric. So there is a tremendous opportunity there, but there are other automobile companies that are now moving to try to get into that space, in part because they see how well Tesla's done, and in part because there's no question that the regulatory environment is moving more towards alternative energy vehicles. So that's where I come out. Is Tesla going to save America? No.
Yeah. Did I have a curious question? This new refueling stations that are a proposal of this $1.8 trillion bill, are these only for Tesla vehicles, or other electric vehicles also could use them for refuels?
Well, it's my understanding it's for all electric vehicles, and the real question is that do they have a universal adapter, right?
They must. Otherwise, they will not be able to use.
I don't know the answer to that question. Okay. But the other problem that I have, Sasha, is, look, it's one thing to encourage alternative energy sources. It's another thing for the taxpayers to pay for charging stations all over the country. The last time I checked, I don't think we paid for all the gas stations and all the other fuel stations around the world, around the country.
Right. But that gets me that Tesla looks like they get subsidies all the time from the government. Even SpaceX received subsidies from the NASA. So it looks like our friend who's at Elon Musk is building his business based on government handouts.
And he became a Man of the Year on the Time.
Yeah,
they just announced it this morning. Right.
Right. Yeah, he just became Time Man of the Year. We're going to do a special on Elon Musk because the thing is, even though he's Time of the Year, we've also did some homework. Maybe I'll have David K. Johnson do some more investigative reporting on him, that he's got a dark side to him that is not being reported, David. In other words, things like he's building a lot of his cars in China and shipping them over here, okay, being one thing. If media has anything that's against him, in other words, if you say anything that's against him, he actually sues the media company to shut them down. In other words, there's a whole huge side to Elon Musk that is just not being disclosed. And I don't know why he's being pandered in front of the media.
I forgot to mention, we discussed Bitcoin. So at least a few months ago, you could use Bitcoin to buy Tesla cars. Not anymore.
Yeah, right. That didn't last very long.
No, it didn't. He would go bankrupt if he would do that.
Yeah, well, I don't know how he can exchange his Bitcoin. And the last thing that we're going to look at is this thing that's affecting, it looks like, all Americans. We just got a report that inflation was around 6%. We just discussed it earlier before you came on board. I remember buying my first home with a 10% mortgage, and I was thrilled because it was only 10%. Interest. Okay. And then they had adjustable rate mortgages. I got a fixed at 10. I felt so good. And back during the Ford administration, for those who recall, there was whip inflation now, and we couldn't ever whip it. In other words, inflation kept going. Are we looking at, in the future crystal ball, inflation being part of the economy like it was back in the 70s and 80s? What are your thoughts, David? Is inflation going to be with us next year?
Well, first, the Fed has finally admitted that this is not all transitory, that there are some structural issues that exist that aren't direct, that will continue. So There are some transitory pressures, but there are structural imbalances as well. Secondly, I think there's a very significant risk of stagflation in the future, stagnant economic growth, as well as above prudent inflation levels. The latest, my understanding was the latest number was 6.8% inflation, which is the highest we've had in almost 40 years. We also don't have people like Paul Volcker anymore. And the Fed is also not as independent as it used to be. And with the significant amount of debt that the U.S. government has, and as quickly as it's accumulating it, there will continue to be a lot of pressure on the Fed not to increase interest rates significantly because of the adverse impact that could have on the federal budget. I mean, interest is already, projected to be the fastest growing expense. And so I think we're at risk of stagflation in the future. I do believe that COVID has changed a lot of things. And I think it's going to end up changing in many ways the way that we work. It's going to reinforce other skills imbalances that we have, and I think it's going to result in additional pressures to increase wages. I might note that while wages are going up, they're not going up as fast as inflation. I would also note that under the current administration's energy policy, energy prices are up dramatically, and that ends up having a ripple effect throughout the entire economy. And interestingly, as you know, they generally don't want to count energy and food when they're talking about inflation, but those are two of the most fundamental things that every American has to have to differing degrees. So those are just a few thoughts, but I'd be interested in yours and Sasha's.
Yeah. Sasha, what are your thoughts about inflation? And in Canada, are you experiencing inflation at all?
Yes, there is a inflation, especially real estate prices and food products, because most of the foods are coming from United States, Latin America. So due to transportation factor, obviously it's rising tremendously in price. And I mentioned real estate. I'm not shopping for cars for a long time now, so I'm not sure how the cars are affected. But probably as used cars, for example. Maybe I should sell my used cars now. They're in good condition. There's very, very low mileage, so definitely will think about that. And but then I will have to buy something. So
yeah, that's
the winning strategy for sure.
Used car prices are way up.
Yep.
They're way up. In part because we can't get chips for new cars.
That's right.
Yeah, right. And so you really ought to think about, if you're not using your one or more of your used cars, you really ought to think about it. The other thing is selling them, because the other thing is that, when you buy a new car, you normally could negotiate a little bit less than the sticker price. It varies on the model and the make, if you will. Now, it's becoming very, very common for people to charge over sticker.
Wow. Okay, so
yeah.
It's a big problem. And then the last thing before we adjourn here for this meeting is something I have to bring up, because I know your friends in Washington, D.C., which you don't live, you live across the street from them, want to spend another $1.8 trillion. In the meantime, since I go on Medicare, I think next year, January. Okay, I keep reading this. Medicare being insolvent in, Social Security is insolvent in 2034, but Medicare insolvent in 2026. David, how can we spend 1.8 trillion on these new programs when Medicare, we are not even going to be able to support Medicare? And what is the talk along the Beltway about this problem? Or do people just in Congress ignore it? I mean, to me, this would be a serious problem. I would be ringing the alarm bells when I see this, and they're asleep at the wheel up in DC. What's going on here?
Well, one of the comments that I made when you asked me about Build Back Better was the fact that this ends up, expanding government, increasing mandatory spending, making additional quote unquote entitlement promises when we already have over $100 trillion in liabilities and unfunded promises that we don't know how we're going to deal with. I've written several op-eds recently, one of which said that we should not have any additional mandatory spending or new government benefit programs until we reform Social Security and Medicare to make them solvent, sustainable, and secure. Part A is projected to become, Medicare is projected to become insolvent in 2026, as you mentioned. Combined Social Security is 2034. Those dates, in my view, will accelerate when we get the new report coming in the spring of this coming year. And the reason they'll accelerate is for several reasons. One, the impact of COVID, and secondly, inflation. The inflation that we're seeing. So I expect that those dates will accelerate further. Pardon me. And one of the things I advocate for, is in addition to not expanding mandatory spending or creating any new government programs till we deal with Social Security, Medicare, is we need some type of a statutory commission that will engage the American people and set the table for an up or down vote by the Congress, mandatory up or down vote. Because the idea that this is going to happen through the regular order is a pipe dream. The only way it'll happen through the regular order is if they get within months of the trust funds going to zero, where they might end up having to cut the benefits across the board to tens of millions of Americans, which is what they did last time in 1983, because that's not a politically acceptable alternative, to cut the benefit of tens of millions of seniors who are the ones that vote with the greatest propensity.
Right. Right.
I think, Nick, I have solution to Medicare problem. Remember, we were discussing the government handouts to people that they receive money and they don't need to work or so on. Why not to put them on a strict, well thought out diet, and also do exercises every day, including 50 push-ups. And so this way, all people will become much healthier, or at least those on subsidies. And those people are really prone to have.
I'm just getting on Medicare, and I just don't understand how they're doing it. They have a Medicare Advantage plan. The giveaways are tremendous, and I don't know how they support it. It just doesn't make any sense at all. I'm going to be a recipient of this thing that I don't understand. I'm bringing it up on our show all the time because I believe major media is ignoring it, and people in Washington, D.C. are asleep at the wheel. To me, it's going to be a real problem, and I don't know if there's going to be, frankly, any solution to the problem. We do want to thank the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States, bringing us insights on these particular issues. And we will be back next week on Economics Monday with some new chapters that we're going to be taking a look at. We'll see you then.